Okay.
1, 2, 3, and you're live. Oh, where's my camera?
Poof. There you are. There it is. Wonderful. Nice work. Nice work.
Hello, everyone. This is Miriam Cunha talking live from Kelowna, BC. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, wherever you are watching this from. Thank you for tuning in. And we have a very special guest this afternoon, Loren Sahara. Am I pronouncing your last name correctly?
Correct. Yeah, sounds wonderful how you say it. You say it however you like.
It sounds like I'm saying the name of the desert.
Right, yeah. I used to get some of those comments back in the day.
Yeah. So we're going to be chatting here about different spiritual ways and whatever comes from our hearts. We've met years ago, Loren, and we had wonderful sharing time of drumming and dancing and singing, which it was so awesome. And then it dissipated, the energy wasn't there anymore. But while we did it, it was so amazing how we got all this bunch of people together.
Yes.
What are your feelings about that?
Well, I'll tell you, and I'm so grateful to you for creating that opportunity in that space and that energy. And it really was a time in my life that I really needed that. I was really kind of sort of explosive with my energy. And I know you've probably felt that at times, and other people have felt it, that you're sort of pacing around spiritually or emotionally and pacing around looking for an opening, or, obviously I wasn't able to create an opportunity like that. So, and it was very much community and family oriented, and it just sort of recreated something I think that is something that's so natural to us. So it was so easy to become part of that, at some level. So I really appreciate that. And I carry that with me. And of course, my older kids, especially my older daughters, they still remember some of those experiences, and yeah, wonderful times, just full of joy, love, expression, art. Yeah. All of that wonderfulness. Yeah.
I told you my mom was going to be here. She already sent a message. She said, I'm happy to watch important messages from you guys.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, important messages. Yes. Well, now we're going to have to step it up a notch.
Yeah. Every message is important in its way. And that's what I feel about what we did at that time. I was also going through stuff, and everybody was going through their own stuff. And I think it was that moment that we had to get together on that tribe, and we call it Samba Tribe, and we spread a lot of happiness in town. But I think it got to a point that it was so much that the town couldn't take it at that time. Right.
We outgrew our expression somehow. Yeah.
So from after that, we went, like Bob and I went through different experiences, smaller groups, and we kept doing music, but different kind of music, but always bringing colors to stage, because that's our mission, is to bring colors and light and happiness.
Absolutely. No, I really, it was just really an ultimate opportunity to express musically, because I hadn't, because I was a bit of a drummer when I was little growing up, but with the sense of self and where do I fit in, and maybe I'm not that good, or maybe they're not that good, or whatever the story was in my head. But then joining, and I'd always sort of had a drum kit that I had that I never really played, and so this djembe, and the idea of playing drums on the snare and all these other percussive instruments was quite an opening. Like it really what we call in Shwalush, one of our communities back home, it's called Shwalush, and it means coming into an opening. really that's what it was for me. It really opened things up in my life, and it was I learned a lot about myself. And of course, there was lots of relationship dynamics that were going on there, and and I'm still learning from that, stumbling through those things. But
aren't we all?
Well, yes. But at the core, at the foundation of it, was the music and the sound and the expression. But not just that, I suppose, was the relationships, I think, that we created as a family. I felt, yeah, lots of playful, very childlike, very playful, and very, very powerful. It was very powerful. It commanded attention. Yeah.
Commanded attention, yeah. And for me, the experience was a lot about stepping out of my shy, not shy, because I don't think I'm shy, but like fear of leading and making things happen and being the front head of things, especially because in Brazil, I don't know if I ever shared that with you or with the group, that in Brazil, the leader of a drumming group in the carnival, they're all men.
Right. Okay. Right.
There is no women leading that. Maybe now they're creating something, but it's a challenge for women to actually step into this male role.
Right.
And I think there was some kind of reaction from some local Brazilians seeing that too.
Okay,
because like, oh, how dare is she doing that? And
right.
I was learning in the process of actually being able to do it and cope with the backslash, I would say, of some energies. But
absolutely.
you learn on the way of not letting these things happen again, like not paying attention, not feeding into that kind of energy, right?
Right. How far does that go back with that kind of patriarchal, control or power or permission, I suppose? So does that go back quite a ways, or was that come through colonization, that it was only men that were allowed to do certain things? Or do you remember?
I believe it's colonization, because I don't think the Africans had that problem with women drumming.
Right.
And this kind of drumming style came from Africa to Brazil with the slaves. But the colonization of the Portuguese was very male oriented. Right. And then that's a long story from the controllers of the world, right? That deals with religion and stuff, because they have been trying to suppress the feminine power for a long time. And by suppressing the feminine power, it unbalances humans, because we all have both energies. Even if you're a male, you have a female energy on you, and I have a male energy on me. And by suppressing one of them, which is the one that gives birth, right? It's control. It's easier to control. That's my opinion.
Right. No, I agree. It's quite confusing, I think. That is a whole other story, colonization and how patriarchy took over. Like, because a lot of the indigenous societies that were here and are still here were matriarchal in many ways. So, but it didn't mean that, women were here and men were here. It just meant that the roles were very specific. And I was just talking to somebody earlier today about how that seemed to shift, and part of the fur trade, and, the European settlers came, and, the men wanted to deal with men, but the women were the ones who were there, but they said, no, we don't want to deal with you. We don't deal with women. And then how that started to change the dynamics of indigenous societies around patriarchy and matriarchies. Yeah.
That's
around value, right? And importance and trading. So, yeah, well, and you mentioned like the religion part and how confusing that became, because you can imagine all the psychological insecurities that came, and the fears that we talked about earlier, how much fear came in. Like, how do you even know what's real anymore, spiritually or otherwise, or even just on your everyday life? Like, am I allowed to express myself like this? Am I going to get arrested? I used to call them culture cops. I said, I'm going to get arrested by culture cops here again because there's so many different protocols and things like that, which I totally understand and I totally respect. These were some of the things that I asked the old timers back in my homeland community when I first woke up, because I was drinking so much, I was drugging so much. I was in my early 20s. I was living downtown Vancouver. I was just lost. I was comfortably numb, floating around, and not feeling anything, not being connected to anything. And it's quite convenient for me at the time because I didn't have to deal with anything in that way. But I went back to my grandmother on my dad's side, who was Nłeʔkepmxkn Scw from the Indigenous community, the Lower Nicola Indian band in the interior. And she passed away. And through that whole process of her passing and the people who came there and the people who shared and little drum song, and I couldn't feel anything except that little drum sound kind of broke through my little bubble a little bit. And I was like, what is that? What is that? And
calling from your heart, right?
It was really calling. I really felt that. I really felt that. And I had to return. So that service happened in the fall, and then the winter I went back there, and I wanted to go and connect with all these old people, all the old timers, the elders there, to find out what was that all about. Like, what is this? What's going on here? And they told me all kinds of things about what that was about. And it was a very powerful time for me because I was in my early 20s, and most of them were kind of in their 80s. So this is 25, almost 30 years ago now, that they were in their 80s. So the teachings that they got were from the turn of the the early 1900s, and the grandfathers and grandmothers they received teachings from were from the early 1800s that passed on. So there was quite a connection there, and I know that bit of that connection has shifted in the last 15, 20, 30 years with people who have passed on. But some of those teachings were very powerful, and the fears and the spiritual ways that we weren't allowed to, on my side, my Nłeʔkepmxkn side, they weren't allowed to express themselves spiritually for generations. It was outlawed,
suppressed.
And isn't that interesting? It was actually against the law. You would get arrested by the police, and your things, the things, my flute would have been taken, my drum would have been taken away, my smudge, my feathers.
Really?
Oh yeah, and most of my room here, my space is full of that now.
I didn't know it was that bad, and that was in the 80s.
No, in the early, in the late 1800s, up until the mid 1950s or so, the Indian Act, the law started to shift a bit because of the resistance, and humanity somehow showed up in, Canadian law. Somehow it got enough pressure to open it up slightly.
I question that. What is it that happened that? Because it was like a domino effect all over America, from south to north to south. The liberation of the slaves, and
right.
And in Brazil, they brought slaves from Africa. The Portuguese brought slaves from Africa because the natives from Brazil, they didn't want to have anything to do with the way of thinking of the Portuguese of like planting, agriculture, or like hard work wasn't on their daily lives. They were thriving, because there was no winter like here with snow or anything. So they had their fishing, their fruits growing all year round.
Right.
And they didn't need to do much, and they lived half naked and thriving in a paradise. And then out of a sudden, the Portuguese arrived, and they tried to force them into working and extracting minerals and planting coffee and sugarcane. And they were not, and many of them were decimated because of a simple cold, flu. They had no antibodies for any of the viruses that came from Europe.
Yeah.
And then they brought the Africans. And then in 1888, I think it was, that princes, princes from the Portuguese descendant royal family, decided to sign the freedom of the slaves. Right. But that was something that was happening all over Latin America, North America. And it always puzzled me what triggered all this liberation. But it wasn't like real, because they just liberated. But okay, you see what you can do now in this society, but they were not prepared for adapting. Right.
That was a big deal. And of course, the local indigenous people, the local native people would have to share the ways of knowing and being on the land there, right? And that happened all throughout Turtle Island, North America here, of course. Yeah. And South America, obviously, too, right? Yeah. Yeah, well, that reminds me of, that oppression and the suppression of a way of life. And I've heard so many ways of it, being described, that certain cultures and communities kind of lost their spirit, or it was broken, and those types of things. And I really started to try to understand it that way. And yet somehow, somewhere inside of me, separate from the way that I thought and the way that I started to learn about all history and what have you, my connection was never broken throughout that time. It was only part of my mind that was, if there was something that was broken, it was the way that I was able to see, or my sadness or my fears, that was the only broken part. It was in my mind. But that I realized, because at such a young age, it was confirmed. I confirmed in my experience that I was fully connected to the land, and fully connected to something that was much bigger than me, because it was so profound that I could not deny it. Even though I didn't speak about it forever, because it just didn't, nobody was talking about it in that way throughout my life. And then I started to, get into all kinds of trouble because of my hardships and my hurt and my pain that I endured through, part of my childhood. But
not only childhood, but the pain came from ancestrals too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Intergenerational. Absolutely. Yeah. And the environment itself, the environment itself, like if some of the watered areas were contaminated, or some areas were contaminated by whatever activity, right? That it was affected. It totally affected me, that energy, the plants and the animals that were affected, because it was the plants and the animals that where I noticed fully that I was connected. And I was sitting on the tractor fender of the tractor that my dad was driving, baling hay in the middle of this beautiful, the site that's behind you right now, it's kind of like that, in this beautiful, serene and fully open valley with all the beautiful hay and the trees in the background. And there was this red-tailed hawk flying above us, and a coyote was about 8 feet behind us. So my dad is baling this hay, and it's taking up the rows of hay. So it would reveal all these mice, right, that were hiding underneath there. And so the coyote and the hawk were taking turns getting a mouse as it happened. So just throughout the day, I was just watching this. I was just part of it. And I was noticing how connected I felt, because I'd look into the eyes of the coyote, and Shinkiep, we call him, and I would say, okay, it's your turn. No, next. No, it's your turn now. And then they'd switch. And I noticed that I was just swallowed up by that environment, by the land. I didn't have to use my imagination. I didn't have to fantasize about anything, like, even like visualize. I was right there. I was so much part of it that I couldn't deny it. And looking back, it really confirms that experience. And yet at the same time, I remember at one moment I looked at my dad, and I remember him looking over at me, and I'll never forget this, because I felt so connected. I just felt one with everything, all the phrases. I am one with the universe, all these things. I didn't have to say that. I just was that in the moment. I was being that. And I looked at my dad, and he looked over at me, and I just saw all this sort of confusion and fear and sort of uncertainty in his eyes. And it sort of scared me a little bit. And because I was sort of, I rely on him for sort of protection, and he was my God, right? My father. And yet I saw this sort of emptiness in his eyes, and it sort of scared me a little bit. But in that moment, I knew that there was something much bigger than that was going on, that I could trust fully. In that moment, I knew that maybe I couldn't trust my dad in the way that I sort of wanted to, but I knew that there was something else there that I could trust that was bigger. And that became sort of my original sort of spiritual reference.
Wow. And how old were you at that time?
Yeah, I was somewhere between 6 and 9. So 6, 7, 8 years old. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you had this experience of being connected with everything very early.
Well, later I used to tell people that, I would trust a butterfly or a squirrel much quicker than I would trust a person, a human, right? Because I started to, my dad had a very difficult life. He was quite depressed and what have you, and he was suicidal. My earliest memories with him being suicidal when I was a very young age. And so he was suicidal my whole life until and even together we were suicidal throughout my teens. We had bonded through drinking, and I tried to get close to him and through that way. And, I remember one time, we fought over the loaded gun, like who was going to go first, right? Whoa. Type of thing. And fortunately, the trigger never got pulled until after I got out of my dark stage. And my dark stage sort of started to end when I was talking about my grandmother passing away and going up to her ceremony and hearing that drum beat, right? And hearing that calling. And I kind of came out of that darkness. And then it was, a little while after that my dad finally did pull the trigger and passed on. Yeah. But I had so many awakened experiences, spiritual experiences, with him involved somehow. And I would always call him and share with him, or if we were in the same space, I would share with him. And he came from the tough guy state, the age of the tough guy, right? And nobody talked like that. Nobody did those types of things, but he was very receptive. He didn't have anything to offer necessarily, but he received all that I experienced and acknowledged it. So it was very powerful for me. And I knew that once we connected, and I was sober and he was sober when we had done these exchanges. And so I felt good. I felt that sort of safety that something, whatever's bigger than us, everything's going to kind of be okay no matter what happens,
It is so rewarding when we get to that understanding, because it's beyond conceptualizing the idea of that everything is going to be okay, because it's very easy when somebody says that, everything is going to be okay.
Right. Yeah. It's misleading.
But when you're aware of that, it becomes probably what religious people would call fate.
Right.
But I do like to borrow that word outside of the religious context.
Right.
With the feeling of knowing of.
That's right.
That everything is in order, even if it doesn't seem like right now in this planet.
Right. Well, absolutely. Well, and that when we use the word knowing, and that's the part where, because I didn't grow up feeling very smart, so I didn't feel like I really knew that much. So my ego had to attach to something else. I needed something else because I didn't have the smarts to use as my ego, my superiority thing. I was an athletic kid and I was kind of musical. So I used that as my, here, this is who I am, this is how I make my mark. And so later, as I started to sort of dismantle that later in my life, as I've had to dismantle this idea of I'm maybe better than somebody else, knowing I needed to find out what being smart was all about. Like, what do smart people think about? Like, what, because I still saw that as up as the highest type of up on the pedestal, and I was always intimidated by that. And so eventually I pursued that. I actually finished high school. A lot of people don't understand how that happened, and I still don't sometimes. And then I went on to get a bachelor's degree, and then I went on to get a master's degree, which
yeah, I've seen. I remember when you went. You said, "I'm going to study," and I thought it was awesome that you decided to do that.
Right.
After that, I actually went back to college too. I did computer science. I don't know why. I don't know why I did that, but something in me was like, I think I need to know this. But
right. And so, and then you got some knowing in that experience.
Yeah, and I wanna apply that into spirituality, because I think we are all about programming our computer, inhabited body computer.
Absolutely, yes. That's what I noticed was I got to hang around with a lot of different people who seem to know, or at least claim to know, a lot of things, right? And so, because I was never much of a reader, and I'm still not that much of a reader. I love to read I read referencing, and I take notes and I look, but I never read really a book from the beginning to the end. And so I was never much of a reader that way. So I was always relational, right? So I would try to gather my knowledge through my experience with people, my relationship with them. And I would say, well, like, what do you know? Teach me what you know, or tell me what you know. And what I found was a lot of the knowledge was just contained in discussions and conversation, that there was no life to the knowledge necessarily. Like, I could have read it from a book in a way, some of it, right? So it was just sort of this information that was just sort of floating around. And I was just so eager to get it. Okay, I need to grab more information. I need more knowledge, get more knowledge, and that'll get you further in life, or you'll get to deepen your life experience and find out what your purpose is, perhaps, or whatever. And what I found was I was doing a lot of the things that the knowledge said you should do in order to get and be something. But what I found, I was just sort of going in circles. I wasn't really getting anywhere.
Because there is knowledge and knowledge.
Right. That's
I think the system calls knowledge the memorized information that they set as true, right? And then there's the knowledge of knowing inside, when you actually get in contact with your higher levels of frequency and start getting the information from inside.
Absolutely.
And that's the knowing.
That's right. So it's interesting how you could say that there's two different knowings, and sometimes it's just in the language, isn't it? Like sometimes it gets lost in translation, maybe in the English language. Yeah. Or wisdom. Wisdom was the other thing. That's what I had found, that there was this knowledge was having the information, and wisdom was sort of becoming the information, which became the being, and not just doing. So what I found now is just doing, going about doing is not the being. It's still disconnected from the original source, right? So, and I still do all the time. I still chase my tail around a lot of times. Everyday life, I get caught up in so many bad habits that I've had throughout my life. And what we talked about earlier is whatever fears or doubts maybe, still roaming around in my stories, in my mind, that I have to attend to. I have to catch that. So I'm much more aware of it, and I can catch it and adjust as life unfolds, and as I continue to create my life, and not necessarily wait for it to just happen. Like I try to, so that sort of language starts to get a bit interesting, because I never have a great time articulating my experience. But here's my understanding through my experience now. My experience is that there's a spiritual energy. And even that word spiritual maybe it's not correct. It's just a life source energy. It's the life force of all things. It's the life source of all things. And then there's all these, and that's a permanence, right? That's the only permanent thing that there is. There's no beginning, there's no end, it has no color, it doesn't discriminate against, Kelowna or Victoria is a better place to live.
it doesn't even discriminate into bad or good.
There's no duality, right? There's no duality. There's no split. And then as soon as you get to the forms, like us as humans, as a form, and the trees and the and the planet, basically, right? Then it becomes duality. It seems to be like there's this, in the universe somewhat. There's this like what I heard it said is there's a chaos and order, and that's like sort of the original split. And then it has to be, and that's what creates harmony. This chaotic aspect of life, and then this orderly aspect of life.
And I got to a conclusion. I might find that is not later. I don't know, but that's what I got to the conclusion now, is that either side is not complete, right? And you can't get to the whole being if you follow one side or the other. So the illusion that the system creates, that you always have to be picking a side, right? And or you're a Democrat or you're Republican, liberal or conservative, right? Black or white, or, absolutely. And then there is the middle path, which unites both. And in our body experience, we can actually get this connection as well, because we do have both polarities in this one body.
Absolutely. Right? Yes. Wonderful. I love that. And what comes to mind right away is the bird, right? Because I remember somebody mentioned that years ago, that, you ever think that the right wing and the left wing are part of the same bird? Right?
Perfect.
So it's all part of the one. But you kind of drift from one end to the other, and there's this duality, like you said, no right or wrong. So there's no morality, but there is. So as soon as we become humans, we're like, oh, we got to deal with all this good, bad, up, down, dark, black, white, everything like that, right? It starts to split. So that's what I've noticed. But that's all temporary, isn't it? Like, as a human, it's all temporary expressions of this life source. Comes and goes. Like everything that has come as a form from, like, the planet, the trees, the water, all the animals and the plants, and us humans, like, we're all temporary expressions of this spiritual, or not, maybe not a spiritual, whatever the word would be. I like to call it the Great Spirit, because the first time I heard that from an Indigenous teachings was like the Great Spirit, right? It wasn't one thing that was a person, or, because of the confusion with cultural confusion and religion, that there was this one God. And or what about the multi-gods? And what about if you believe that the water is a god, and the sky is a god? And
for me, religion was done when I was, how old was I? I think I was 9, or 8. I don't remember. We went to Guatemala because my mom's twin was sick, and he passed away. And at that time, my grandma, who was very, very Catholic, she said, oh, she's got to do the first communion. And then she started teaching me the catechism, I think it's called.
Okay, right.
And then she was teaching me, and then I looked at her and I asked, well, but who made God? Like, if God made everything, who made God? And she didn't have an answer for that. And for me, that was it. I was like, oh, okay, so there's no answer here. Right. I gotta look somewhere else.
Right. Where did you look? Do you remember where you kind of went from there?
Oh, from there, I went back to Brazil, and I tried all different kinds of ideas, from yoga and I don't know. I went to everything. I became a Reiki master. I joined the Rosicrucians. I studied UFOs. Everything you can imagine. Even when I was diving into the dark side, the dark night of the soul, lots of bad things were happening on the external life. I went and joined actually a magic group and then I understood what they were doing. They were choosing one side of the two sides, right?
Right.
Which wasn't complete either. But it gave me a lot of understanding to go through all of that, because ultimately you can only find the answer inside of you.
Right. Yeah, it's really true. And how long does it take for us to understand that or believe that? Or I think that's why I was grateful to have had that experience early on in my life, even though it was coupled with, because there was this good light experience coupled with the sort of dark experience that was my dad looking at him and thinking, okay, this doesn't seem right. This seems right, but it was bigger than that. So I knew that it was much bigger than both of us, but I didn't fully understand that until I got older and, got through my coping mechanism life of drinking and hiding and being high and hiding out and being angry and being sad and being mad and striking out at the world and being upset about why things are so messed up. But I could only see through the lenses of my hurt and my pain. I couldn't see through the other side of the beauty and, from the, 60,000 foot view from up there looking down going, you can't even see any of that. You just see a wonderful flow of, life on the earth, right? Until you get in really close and you see all these details of, oh, I was late. I was supposed to be there at 3:30 and I didn't get there till 4:30, and all these little details of life that stress us out and take us away from this natural connection. And there's so many layers of distraction, and there's whole worlds that are built on top of these layers that they're so solid, that they're so well insulated that you can't even get down into the core of. That's why it seems like a lot of people, they go, what are you talking about? Like,
yeah, because they're distracted watching sport games or concerts or the politics, right?
Right.
Or making a living, trying to make money to pay the bills. And,
just surviving, right? Surviving. Yeah. And I can certainly relate to just surviving and feeling sort of desperate. Yet I think there's something sort of simple in that survival mode. Yet you might not be able to see through maybe those more spiritual lenses, or be able to be feel like more connected in a way that it feels safe, and this is peace and love and beauty and joy really sits there in that space and is always there. It's not like an emotion that just comes and goes, like a cloud passes. It's like, like a lot of our feelings, it just comes and goes, right? I was mad one minute and then I'm not the next minute. And like that deeper sense of love and happiness is resting in that place. That's what I really understood back then. And that's what I sort of return to now. And I still get frustrated. I still make a lot of mistakes. And when I'm sort of stewing in my mind about what's really going on, then I'm struck by that deeper sense of being. I know it's not laughing, but I sometimes could put like a coyote smile on it, so they're kind of smiling at me, going, you wandered off again.
I was actually going to mention laughter, because laughter is powerful. It's neutral and it breaks with paradigms.
Right, absolutely.
So when you're diving into a certain belief, thinking, oh, this is the whole truth, this is the absolute truth, and then you laugh. That's something I learned actually with the joining a magical group that it's they call themselves chaos magicians. Okay. And I think I still have this essence of chaos magic, because it's the understanding that you can grab any elements from the chaos where everything is and build a reality out of that. Wow. Like the chaos and order, that's how it works, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's wonderful.
And laughing, it's one of the tools, because you can create a ritual of whatever kind you want. That's the beauty of chaos magic, because you use your imagination to create your own ritual with whatever elements you want. And then after you're done with that total belief on that thing you're creating, you step out, and then you laugh, and then you forget about it, and then you let it work.
Yeah, that's something that's so amazing. Absolutely, I love that. I wasn't able to laugh a lot, I think, through certain parts of my life, especially after I found this pathway of this kind of my Indigenous heritage, my roots, and all this ceremony. There's a lot of laughter involved, but later, once I started to find out about, all this knowing and knowledge information about, how the Indigenous peoples here in Canada, especially, were treated, and how things were really going, how the truth underneath all of that, I wanted to help reveal that. So I got very serious. I was always very serious, very serious. This is very serious, right? I think I've got some permanent marks here. They're like my knowledge marks, I think I got.
Now you need to laugh it out.
That's right. Loosen it up a bit. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been fortunate to be around people that are quite like joyful and fun, very optimistic, and very, very loving that way. That are very funny, just funny too, right? Like, with no agenda. If there's no agenda, then you can just be playful. And
I'm gonna share something with you, because it reminds me of that. I took one time ayahuasca experience, actually at the islands there where you are.
Okay, yeah.
And it was very interesting, because at that time, I think I was thinking about how we were destroying Earth with everything we were doing. And then ayahuasca, it's the spirit of the Earth. And so Earth took me to this trip to understand how Earth works.
Right.
And I'm like, holy smokes. And then at the end, I ask Earth, because it was kind of like a consciousness of Earth blending with my consciousness. And I'm asking Earth, well, what about everything that we're doing to you, like extracting oil and all this destruction? And the answer was, if I wanted, I could wipe it out in seconds, but I'm allowing it for the experience.
Right.
And I was like, holy, this took such a weight out of the responsibility of doing something about that, when actually the planet itself as a being is allowing all of that experience.
Right. Absolutely. No, I hear you. Yeah, that something bigger than us going on. Like, we think we can control the weather, control the animals, control the plants, control all these things, right?
Yeah, all we can do is be with it, right?
Yeah. Well, that's when I think, like, thank you for sharing that, because it's really, I've gone through a cycle of this, being really upset, and really what my wife used to call, like, a fundamentalist of this whole Indigenous resurgence, and take down the Canadians type thing, right? And take down Canada, pull the flag down, right? Because of all the lies and all the deceit and all the oppression and current the current ways of being still in the relationship that are still not okay, right? It's just not enough what's been done. Yet at the same time, something else is going on, something bigger. It doesn't mean we need to stop. It's just I know I need to root myself in that spiritual place, so that when I go and do my work and go and do my life, be my life, that I'm rooted in that place, not in a place of just anger and hurt and pain and suffering. That I need to be connected to the land, especially, and that's where it's not where I get my energy or my power necessarily. I already am that. I already am that, so I don't have to make anything up. And I have my unique talents, I suppose, that come with me. We all have our uniqueness individually, but it's kind of interdependently, that collectively, that where things really come about. And naturally, I think, because I don't see too much going on anywhere that one person or one thing is creating anything, right? Any sustaining anything. It's all collective. It's all intertwined.
Yeah. Everyone has a role. right?
Absolutely.
The Mayans on the calendar that I study, I still study after so many years, because there's always something new coming up.
Right.
It's a calendar called Tzolk'in, and it was their spiritual calendar. And on that calendar, everybody is born on that one day that is part of a collective of days.
Yeah.
And they were very big on 13.
Yeah.
So it's a collective of 13 days. So your birthday is into that collective of 13 frequencies. So you have all of these things together that work on helping you understand about what you came here to understand and to learn.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
And it's always a collective, right? It's not a one-dimensional thing at all.
Right.
not two either. It's many dimensions. It's multidimensional.
Multidimensional, yeah. And that's where, like, even the whole Western, because we used to do Indigenous worldview, Western worldview. Western worldview was very individualistic, and Indigenous worldview was multifaceted and collective. So I was really stuck on that. And what I realize now, that there's another duality. There's this individuality, individualism, independent type of teaching or experience or energy, and then there's this collective one. And there is a sense of they do exist, they coexist. They're sort of like interrelated opposites, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're sort of opposing, but they're interrelated. So I really understand that now. And I think that I just hated, if I can use that word, I just hated Western anything. And it's still sort of bits and pieces of it in me now still, but I don't talk about it like I used to. Like, I even taught my younger batch of kids, like, well, you know, be careful with this, and you see a Canadian flag, and be careful about that flag. And you know, when my 10-year-old, he's almost 10, and when he was really young, like 5, 6, 4 years old, even 3, 4 years old, I was telling him about these things that are not true about what's going on in Canada, and he sort of grew up going, wait a minute, why are we celebrating Canada's birthday when it's on the backs of colonized Indigenous people? So I loosened up a little bit. So I'm trying to see that there's value in that, because they are interrelated opposites. I don't agree with stuff that's going on. There's a lot of justice that needs to be taken care of, and I know that we'll go through more generations dealing with these things, right? But I'm really finding that because of my spiritual path that I see that I just didn't all of a sudden come to a higher intelligence in my mind. Like, oh, I get it now. Here's the formula. This plus this plus this minus this equals all of that. I think it is rooted in the place where, it's, that spiritual lens. And it doesn't have any particular, I surround myself with nature's, objects, I suppose, to remind me. Those are reminders, right? Constant reminders. And smells, whether it's a sage or it's the smell of pine tree or cedar bark or what have you.
That's interesting, because I have stones everywhere I look around here, even underneath my pillow. And I'm like, why do I have stones everywhere? You just said it. It's to remind me.
Right. Absolutely. It really is. And it was interesting that you spoke about a grandmother kind of ayahuasca journey, because my experience with that, I don't want to say a highlight, but the one of the memories that I have as a reflection of that experience was that I remember looking out and seeing, wow, it's just all liquid. And then I was like, oh my goodness, I'm breathing in that liquid. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I am that liquid. I am this. And so that reminded me again that's that deeper layer that's always been happening. It's always been like that. It's just that when we look at each other, I put this shirt on, I put this necklace on, I've got this hat. I'm so different from you now, right? Like I'm so unique, and that's part of, I know that some of it's part of my ego, or it's just part of just playful expression or whatever.
It's the play, because we allow our souls allow our being to come to this dimension here and play with it.
Just play, yeah. Play it out, the dynamic expression of life, hey?
It's just that we get distracted and start making big dramas and get into the drama and forget about the play.
Yeah. Well, it's a life's work to play in the drama too, isn't it? Like I really have, I don't know how much of my life I've spent doing that, a lot of my life, and I still play in that one from time to time. And it's the truth is it's possible to spend your whole life doing that. And is that good? Is that bad? Is that I know that we're not fully experiencing life completely. I think that you started by saying it's incomplete somehow, right? And that some layer underneath everything, we're already complete, right?
That's the paradox of the universe,
right?
Because it is already complete, but it's always incomplete because that keeps it going and moving.
Keeps it growing,
yeah.
Growing and the momentum, because everything's sort of supposed to grow naturally. You drop the seed, it grows if it gets the proper nutrients and light. Same with us, we grow, except if you don't get the proper nutrients and light, then you don't really fulfill that, right? And I think that that's why I got into the work that I have been doing as a helper, is to feed my experience with somewhat selfishly, because I was always trying to unravel and dig deeper into what is really going on here. What am I missing? And so the return to just looking within myself, looks within, that introspection, like the black bear I have in my medicine wheel. It's a real inner reflection. And then I see that the medicine is greater when there's more of us that experience that together. So that's why I was like, come on, let's go up to the mountains, everybody, right? And I was just talking to a brother of mine earlier that it's sort of a strange, funny thing that I just said it just last night to him. I said, it's interesting that the children, the Indigenous children, were ripped away from their families and communities and put in cattle trucks and taken to residential school. And the communities were left empty of children playing and laughing. It was just heartbreaking, right? That visualization. And what we did was interesting, because at one point when we went to the mountains, we recreated that opportunity to become one at the top of the mountains and spend our time there and living off the land and enjoying ourselves up there. That at one point, several of the trips, my uncle, a rancher, he used his cattle truck, and we threw all the kids in the back of the truck to go up there. And I never made the connection until last night. I said, we also took the kids from their families, put them in a cattle truck, but we took them to the mountains to kind of recalibrate and reconnect and rejuvenate and reclaim their original teachings from the land. So I found that was interesting. This cattle truck was involved, and it was very interesting, and it threw me off. But I had to laugh at the same time that it was a sort of a hardship, but turned into something sort of wonderful. And some of the kids were actually crying because they were scared to go up there. Mm. And then here's the
and that's part of the work you do to take.
Not right now. I used to do that. Yeah, I did a lot of that. And but just to finish that last part off, is that some of them were crying because they didn't want to come back. They didn't want to leave the mountain, because they knew that they might end up just hanging out at 7-Eleven or getting back on a device and being disconnected, right? Because we merged into a family and a community up there. And being on the land was just, the land, the teachings from the land pretty much take up the majority of all of the work that I had done at that time. I just needed to try to get everybody in the spot and, get enough wood and make sure we had enough of this and that. And yeah, we just needed to get out of the way a little bit. Yeah. But the work I do now is more, right now, what I do a little bit of work collectively with companies and organizations and stuff, but I actually just do a lot of one-on-one stuff with Indigenous folks at different ages and stages of life. my goal is to connect to more people, like collectively. And some days I'm having such a good experience with this growth and these breakthroughs and transformation with people individually. And then there's the other times where I feel like, geez, I wish I had 20 people right here, right now. That's why I taught post-secondary for 5, 6, 7 years or whatever it was. And I've slowly been, I'm slowly dropping out of, high school or university, post-secondary, because it's capped. You have a captive audience, which is wonderful, but not everybody's there for the same thing. So there's always some little twist in the agenda of the course that I have to deal with that I don't want to be I don't want to deal with that stuff. Here's what I feel like, what you and I are talking about a little bit, about what we need to learn more about. And for especially even younger children to be exploring that in their own words, in their own ways of expression, in their own curiosity and wonder.
What is this all about? You know that your wish is your command. So if you wish you had 20 people,
right,
you can create that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's just a matter of organizing, because I have 5 kids and 4 of them are down here with us now. And my life is so full, like it's full. So sometimes I used to sort of beat myself up. Well, you can do more. And then I would try to catch myself. Why are you doing that? Like, why? Because then sometimes more stress would come in, right? Because I wasn't meeting all these needs. And then I would catch myself being, well, is that from my story of that I'm not good enough and I'm never good enough? So if I do more, maybe I'll be better. So I catch myself doing that. So then I back off and make the quality of whatever I'm doing of a greater impact in those moments. And, it reminds
me. Maybe you need to detach from maybe I will be better. You are
absolutely
already.
I know. That's when I know at the deeper level, it's that when that. So we have Coyote's the trickster back in our homeland. And for me, Coyote has always been, I've been close to Coyote. I used to wear this Coyote hide to school, I think in grade 1 or something, for the longest time. It was really stinky and horrible. People didn't like it. I just loved it. I just wore it over top of me. But Coyote is like the trickster in our territory, but also part of the transformation and transformer and a lot of the teachings. And what I saw was Coyote was either would mess up, would make big mistakes itself to show me not to do that, or it would trick me by leading me into some crazy place and laugh and be over there with a smile going, right? And so that's sort of what shows up for me all the time when I realize I'm in over my head somewhere and I'm doing it for all the wrong reasons, or it's not what I should be doing. But I still fall into that. I still fall prey to my own.
The thing is that what we should be doing, it always flows. If things start not flowing, then the direction is being pointed somewhere else.
Absolutely. Like there's no resistance in a way, right? Yeah.
Because if we don't want to be in pain and suffering again, resistance is what causes that.
Absolutely. Makes it bigger, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Yeah. Why does it take so long to figure this out? My goodness.
Because if it was too short, it would be boring.
Isn't that the truth? Yes. All these roadblocks and all these obstacles to gather the wisdom and but that purity, that purity for the children. I think that's why I love children so much, and probably why I wanted to have so many kids, is because they do see through those eyes of that purity all the time already. And until I tell them, no, you have to see it this way, and no, don't do that, and do it like this. And I interfere.
Maybe you should let them tell you how to look at things.
Let them lead the way, right?
Yeah.
No, that's a beautiful thing, because I certainly have learned more from my children than I've ever learned from any of the studies I've ever done about life and the importance of life and relationship and connection, right? True connection. And it's such a beautiful, and it can just change just like that in a moment, so quickly, of connection and disconnection.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it has a lot to do with the individual decisions of, okay, I had enough of this learning, or I can't take anymore, and I'm moving on. And there is always a constant flow of people in your life and situations. Some stay for a long time.
Yeah.
But the only permanence is you with what you've been learning through.
Yeah, well, that's the hard part too, about the life cycle and death and what have you, right? And especially with children and for ourselves, even, because I have I've had a different experience with the idea of life and death and fear around that. I don't have fear around that. And at one time I challenged myself, because I was suicidal in my early life, that maybe I'm not afraid of death because I was suicidal and I'm not afraid to die. But I was afraid to die then. That's why I didn't take my own life. I was too afraid. So then I came to the point where there's just this idea of, this is my body. I'm not just my body. I'm not just my body mind, right? So my attachments come from my body mind. That's not who I am. It's part of what makes up this playful expression, right, of life. And,
it is the display.
Yeah.
So getting to that understanding, it's very deep. Not too many people get to that, and that's where people should focus on getting to. It's to understand who we are really, like, and just looking inside. There are different moments you realize that, but that one moment that stuck in my memory was, I was in a meditation, and then out of a sudden I start seeing all these rainbow rays, little rainbows everywhere, moving everywhere. And I was like, holy, this is beautiful. And then I realized that that's what I was.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And what is rainbow? It's a full spectrum of light.
Spectrum of light, yeah.
And so, we're light. So when we say we are light, that's what it is. And it's beautiful. It's colorful. And it's moving.
That's wonderful. I'm reminded now for some reason about when you told me that you're a solar warrior. I think it was solar warrior was part of the Mayan, part of the calendar, but part of also the explanation of the calendar. And that same day, another person had told me that another person that you don't even know, but that same day, a person told me that as well. That, oh, you're the solar warrior. And I was thinking, wow. So I remember getting that print. Yeah, I think it was solar. That's how it was described.
Let's see. Now I have an app.
Oh, there you go. You've got the app handy.
Yeah. You gotta give me your date of birth.
Yeah, so February 3rd, 66.
February 3rd. 66?
Correct. Way back in the day.
I'm older than you. All right. So yeah, solar warrior. The warrior is yellow. The warrior represents courage, and the shaman. So you came here to learn how to activate your shaman power. And that, like I said, is part of a collective of 13, right? So the first one on the collective tells your purpose here. And your purpose, it's beauty, art, and elegance, to create and see beauty, understand beauty. And so you attract opportunities in life to learn about beauty and creativity and art and all these beautiful things.
Wonderful.
And you're on the last wave of 13 of the calendar. I don't know if you can be seeing here, but it's on the last wave, meaning this is probably your last incarnation on this 3D dimension here. But
interesting.
It doesn't mean it's the end. It's just the end of this huge. It's an end of a huge cycle.
Right. No, absolutely, because that is what I understood too. I think early on in my life, that cycle, right? The cycle, because even my 5-year-old now, she's the one who tells me, Dad, the water goes down here and it flows down the creek and it goes up into the sky, and then it goes into the clouds, and it goes over the mountains, and then it drops down, and then it comes down, and it goes back down, and it goes this, and it's like, I just love that, right? and because it's such a connection, this whole cycle of life, and cycle of these, the tree grows and then it falls. I see that I do a lot of my work on my calls. I'm in the forest all the time. Yesterday I was out there and I see all these trees just naturally falling over, and then another tree growing right up from that tree where it fell. And just these natural cycles, it's just such a beautiful reminder. It's so comforting.
Every year we go through a little cycle within the big cycle of life.
Right.
And the cycle you started in February this year,
yeah,
it's about letting go of death and transformation, giving freedom to that energy.
Yeah.
So it's a huge transformation year, like radical transformation by letting go. And it's in opposition to your warrior.
Nice.
So it's like an opposition year, but it's where you learn from the other side of the two sides, right?
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, that certainly relates to I can relate to that experience. Yeah. Wow. Well, and part of, at the very beginning of this year was a very interesting time for me. Well, we had our pet, my dog, the last dog that I had was Buckskin. I probably had him when I was up in Kelowna there too. He was 16 years old, and he passed away in March this year, just after the pandemic. And of course, my youngest daughter, it was a family dog. Everybody loved him. But my youngest daughter was just so connected to him, just so connected. And we started to talk to her more and more about, he's a cycle of life, and he's going to pass it on, and his body will lay down and go back into the earth, and all this type of stuff. And she understood that in whatever a 5-year-old, even at 4, we were talking about it, but she understood that in her own way. And then when he died, it was very powerful. It was that transformation. And she took part digging the hole in our backyard where we buried him. And we did that ceremony. We covered him with cedar boughs and fir boughs. And the ceremony was beautiful. She was just such a part of it that she didn't have to use her imagination. She didn't have to make stuff up or read a book about it necessarily. She was just right there, part of that experience. And it was a beautiful thing.
That's beautiful. And it matches exactly the experience that you chose for this year, letting go of that and transformation.
I'm not trying to replace it right away either. I noticed that because I was trying to get another dog before this one passed away, just to try to do like some of the teachings. I wanted my old dog to maybe teach, but that was all part of my thing. I want this, so I want that, but that didn't work out, and I really had to sit with that for quite some time, and wrestle with my ego mind about what that was about, and then get out of my way and just allow it to be what it was supposed to be.
Interesting. And this year for me, it started in September. It's a cosmic wind. The wind is the communication of the spirit, so it's cosmic communication of the spirit. And that's why I'm on this channel now, because it's like, okay, this is time to communicate everything that I've gone through and share.
Yeah. Well, and how's that going? How are you feeling fulfilled with that? Like, is it you just starting to explore and it's just starting to open up, or?
It's just starting to open up, and it's been an inner work of detachment of what's happening, how it's happening, or trying to control anything.
Right.
see going with the flow, and your presence here, we're going with the flow, talking from the heart. And it's amazing because you gave that title to what we were going to talk about today. And we never thought about it, but we are connecting from the heart, and we went through the whole thing about the spiritual ways of knowing, doing, and being.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. It's such a wonderful cycle. Like you say, it's a cycle within a cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And like, it's not just a linear experience. And
yes, I'm working on quieting all this cheat chat of like, oh, there's so many channels, and who's gonna want to watch this? And like, I'm just doing what I am supposed to be doing.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. I'm so grateful that you've done this. I really, I've carried you guys and all your, your joy and your passion with me everywhere that I went after I left Kelowna. And it was fun. Like we did that Zoom thing. I know we were trying to communicate with our musical experiences, and we tried that. You tried that. It was wonderful. Yeah, I'm so grateful that we did.
Yeah, at least it did something at that moment when the whole lockdown was happening.
Yeah.
But the thing is that the technology doesn't cooperate much for that.
No.
Not yet.
No, and I see that in the entertainment industry that people are having to deal with that and figure that out for their productions, and they're trying to get back into our lives with their live music and their entertainment and stuff like that. And so I can really appreciate that shift in humans and technology coming together to adapt and create a new way of connection, ultimately, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. So I would like to do this again with you. If you want to come up with something you want to talk about, or
absolutely,
we can make some music.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. That sounds fun.
Well,
I definitely give a great big hugs and love to everybody in your circle there in the local area, and I'm really grateful, and I really miss your boy there. And I know everybody's on Facebook somewhere, but I never really.
He's probably watching because I told him to watch it.
Okay.
Sure he's watching.
Well, I'll never forget. And I know that one day, and I felt this. The cycles of some experience comes around and energy comes around and has this urge, and one of the urges was to do, and eventually I'd like to put together a few songs and create some songs, because my youngest son, he's quite the musician already. But that drum song that I did that we used to kind of play with back then,
the one that Bob wants to remember.
Yeah,
he loves that.
And I'll never forget the time. I don't know whose living room we were in. Like, we sort of took over so many living rooms back in the day, or whatever space that we were in. But I remember Miriam, he sang a bit, like I did whatever voice that I did for part of the song, but I remember he kind of layered on top of it. And I just remember being so lifted by that. Like, I was already lifted. I already felt that. And then I remember his voice, what happened in that moment. And then all of us, being carried and then just floating around with that. It was just such a beautiful thing. And I want to create something with that at some point, someday, before I'm, too old to even remember what that's all about, that creative expression, and capture it. I know that sounds selfish sometimes, but to capture it so that we can play it again or something.
In terms of music, there is something being born right now, something new. I still haven't figured out yet, but there are people that came to my life right now that are brought me back into watching the Samba Tribe videos again, and I was like, holy, and we're gonna do something on that sense, but we haven't figured. So if you come, you can join us.
Okay, absolutely, and I will be part of that, because I know I will be back through that territory many times. My mom still lives a little farther up north from there, so wonderful. Right. Well, I love you, and thank you for accommodating, creating this, and inviting me. I'll do it again anytime.
Awesome. Thank you for coming and sharing your wisdom and your experience on knowing, doing, and being. And if you're watching and you want to get in contact with Loren, his contact is down below. And
wonderful.
The links you sent me.
Get a hold of me, my cell phone, my email, or whatever Facebook thing I have going on there. Yes, I'd love to hear more and explore further.
All right,
okay,
brother.
sister.
Thank
Love you. Be good.
I love you too.
Nłeʔkepmxkn Scw. Bye-bye.
All right. Let's end this stream and